Hello, Antioch Baptist Church and friends. I'd like to welcome you back to this Sunday school lesson. The title of the lesson is The Fruit of Sin, coming from Genesis chapter 4 and 5, mainly focusing on the first part of chapter 4. Before we get into the lesson, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, we just pray you'd be with me as I stand to teach here. Just thank you for Jesus dying on the cross and shedding his precious blood to be saved. Thank you for all your many blessings you bestowed upon us. Pray just be with each object of prayer. Pray for those that are sick. Pray for those that are lost, especially that you convict them and save them. We just pray for the service on Sunday, that you just bless and help in that. And be with Brother Kenny as he stands to preach his first message. Just give him an unction and an enablement to do that, Lord. And we just pray you be with the missionaries out in the fields, whether it be foreign or domestic, that you just help them and encourage them. This has got to be a very difficult time for them. And with this virus going around, and pray you just help us to just stay in there for you, and just pray that everything will be done for your honor and glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, we're looking in, of course, again, the lesson is the fruit of sin. And last week in chapter 3, we saw the entrance of sin into the world. And we already saw a little bit of the fruit of that sin when Adam and Eve realizing they were naked and then being cast out of the Garden of Eden there. And then additionally the earth being cursed and bringing forth thorns and briars and other things that it would, and by the sweat of the brow that Adam would have to work and labor to have food from there on. So we already see the effects of sin, but now we see the even more further results of sin. So in verse 1 it says, "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord." And so the first thing we see is that Adam knows his wife. This speaks of intimacy. It speaks of the man and woman in a relationship having children, and that's what God told them to do. He said, "Be fruitful and multiply," and that was his intention. But God also intended for that to take place in a marriage relationship. It's not to be outside of the marriage relationship. Notice it says Adam knew Eve, his wife. And that's the reason we're in a mess. A lot of the mess that we're in our country today is because we've said that's not the way it is. Women just go out and have children, and the daddies of the children have nothing to do with the children, and you get the mess we have right now because it's not God's intended way. It's not the way that God intended it to be. But we see that Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, and she bare Cain, and she calls him Cain because I've gotten a man from the Lord. And so ultimately that's kind of what his name means. And it's almost like she sees Cain's birth as a fulfillment of the prophecy concerning how that the seed of the woman would bruise the head of the serpent, and the serpent would bruise his heel. She thinks, here we go. We've got the seed. We've got the one that's going to do that. Unfortunately, as we'll see on through this, nothing further from the truth concerning that. But it says here in verse number 2, "And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground." Well, here it doesn't say a whole lot about her bearing Abel, but it doesn't even say what she said here. But the very fact that his name means vanity or vapor, it kind of gives you the ideal that she's a little disillusioned by the conditions of the world and what they're having to face, and the fact that she didn't see this immediate change or the immediate answer of the prophecy that she thought Cain was going to be. So she's a little kind of just disillusioned and realizing that hey, life's nothing but vanity and vexation of spirit. But we see here that Abel was a keeper of the sheep, so he was a shepherd. But Cain was a tiller of the ground, so he was a farmer. And there's nothing inherently wrong with either of these jobs. They're perfectly good jobs. They're perfectly good tasks to keep one busy and to work and labor at. And that's not the problem. The fact that they took the different courses of what they did as far as their occupation. But it says in verse number 3, "And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, of the fat thereof, and the Lord had respect unto Abel in his offering. But unto Cain and his offering he had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So in the process of time, it's an undetermined amount of time when we really don't even know how much age difference there was between Cain and Abel. Could have been a few months, could have been a few years. We don't really know. We're not told. But we see that here in the process of time that they both bring forth an offering unto the Lord. Now we can only assume that the Lord had given some instruction on bringing forth an offering, and so they think it's time to bring forth an offering, and Cain brings forth that which he had worked and labored in the ground. He brought forth vegetables and grains or something like that he had raised, whereas Abel brings forth a firstling of the flock and the fat thereof, and it says that the Lord had respect unto Abel's offering, but unto Cain's he did not have respect. And you say, well, that seems kind of wrong on God's part, but no, God is not a respecter of persons. God had clearly, obviously given some instructions, and I believe that goes back to when God actually slew an animal there to make coats of skin for Adam and Eve back in the garden, that he set forth a establishment of, this is the type of offering you bring unto me. It's an animal sacrifice. Abel got that. Cain didn't. Cain here is trying to do a work salvation. He's trying to work his way to heaven by the labor and work of his hands. Abel, you can be a sheep or herd sheep all you want, but ultimately it's not your work and labor that produces more sheep. It's just the natural process of sheep producing more sheep, and we see that the sheep here had a firstling, and he brings that firstling, that pure firstborn of a lamb, of a ewe there, and brings it to be the sacrifice. And so we see that God has respect to that offering and does not have respect to Cain's offering. And we see that Cain is very wroth, and his countenance fell. So he's upset, he's down and out, his head's hanging low probably. He's like, I don't understand. I've worked and I've labored hard in producing these grains or these vegetables, and I've brought them to the Lord, and the Lord's rejected them. I don't understand why God won't accept my works, why God won't accept what I've done, but yet he accepts what Abel has brought. And you can see instantly that this is going to create a situation where Cain is going to be somewhat angry, could misdirect his anger onto his brother rather than, looking at the situation and realizing that he's the one in error here. But it says, and the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wrought, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted, and if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So, first of all, the Lord speaks unto Cain here in verse 6, says, why are you wrought? Why is your countenance fallen? Why are you upset about this, Cain? He's trying to get Cain to see the error of his ways. He says, if you do well, in verse 7, shalt thou not be accepted? Obviously, he was not doing well. Obviously, God had at some point put down, as we believe, a blueprint or a pattern of how a sacrifice was supposed to be done unto him, and Cain did not follow that. He did not do well. And he says, if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. So when you do not well, when you didn't do well, just like you've done and brought him this offering that I cannot accept, sin lieth at the door. And it says, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And said, once sin lies at the door here, you will be driven by the desire and the push of sin rather than by what you should be, by a godly desire and a righteous desire. And then instead of you having, and the last part of thou shalt rule over him, instead of you having a rule over your desires, you're letting sin control you and push you and cause you to desire the things that sin desires. And so that's the issue we have here. And so, we don't see everything we know concerning Cain's offering here in Genesis chapter 4. We have a few other places where it talks about it, and I want to look at those over in Hebrews chapter number 11. It talks about Abel's sacrifice here. And it says, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying his gifts, and by it being dead yet speaketh. So here we see Abel's sacrifice was more excellent than Cain's. They were both a sacrifice, but yet Abel's was more excellent. Over in John, see if I can find it here. I didn't completely mark it, but First John chapter number 3 and verse number 12 says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one. So right here we see a key thing. Cain was of the wicked one. So Cain was being manipulated and controlled by Satan. It says he slew his brother, and therefore slew he him, because his own works were evil and his brothers were righteous. His works were evil. And again, it was his works. And his brothers were righteous. His brother did what was right, and Cain did what was wrong. And then over in Jude, the book of Jude, and verse number 11, we see, woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor. So we see here, Jude is warning us concerning about those evil men in the last days that would corrupt themselves and lead people astray, that they're following in the way of Cain. And as we go on down through here, first of all, we see in Genesis, number 1, that Cain is trying to gain righteousness by his own way. And we see on down through here that way progresses on through his family as we look at his genealogy of those that come after him in the latter part of this chapter. That brings us back, pick back up in verse 8. It says, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So here we see that Cain goes and he talks to Abel and his brother, and it comes to pass that as they're out in the field, Cain gets apparently so upset with Abel, he again is focusing his energy, he's focusing his focus, instead of the blame on him, looking at the blame, putting the blame on himself for bringing the wrong sacrifice unto God, and therefore God not accepting it. He's jealous and upset with Abel because Abel brought the right sacrifice and was accepted, so he channels his anger toward Abel and ends up and kills his own brother. It says in verse 9, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? So the Lord, this is reminiscent of the voice of the Lord coming into the garden there after Adam and Eve had sinned, and calling unto Adam, saying, where art thou, Adam? So the Lord's coming to Cain. He's given him an opportunity. He's already gave him an opportunity to repent and make things right there back in verse number 6 and 7. But here, after he's killed Abel, it's not that God doesn't know where Abel's at. God, in his omniscience, very well knows where Abel's at. But he's wanting Cain to fess up here. He's wanting Cain to admit to what he's done. And Cain's unwilling to do that. And it's because we see here that Cain, in a very rebellious tone here, says, I know not. And we know that's a lie. We know he slew his brother, so he knows very well where his brother is at. And then he goes on and says, I my brother's keeper. And he says, am I supposed to be the one that's supposed to keep and look after my brother? And of course, the answer could be, it is everyone's responsibility to look after each other. We're not to just try to live our lives to ourselves. When we live our lives to ourselves and just focus on ourselves, we get very selfish and we get very much in the way of Cain. We're looking out for number one and not looking out for everybody else, and just focused on what makes us happy and what gives us pleasure and what gives us satisfaction and joy, and not worrying about the fact that we're doing it by stepping on the backs of others. And we've got so many people in the world today that are so self-centered. They're definitely in the way of Cain. They're only concerned about themselves. And that's definitely what you see here in Cain's attitude. And then verse 10 says, and he said, and this is speaking of the Lord here, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. So the Lord said, Cain, what have you done? And again, he very much knew what Cain had done. He knew that Cain had killed Abel. That was not a hidden to God. There was not any secret from God in that regard. Again, he's trying to get Cain to admit guilt, to admit, to repent, to realize he's done wrong. But Cain just has a rebellious attitude in this. It says in verse number 11, it says, And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond thou shalt be in the earth. So God places a curse on Cain because of this. It says, you're cursed in the earth. You're from the earth, and you're a vagabond, you're a fugitive. You're going to have to roam around and be apart from others. So basically, he's being just as much as Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden, Cain is being exiled from the rest of humanity here. And so we see two distinct lines of people that are going to develop here as we come down through the rest of these two chapters. We see the line of Cain, and then eventually we'll see the line of Seth. But here we see that he's cursed, and he says, henceforth you're going to till the ground, but it's not going to give its yield to you. So the ground's even further cursed because of Cain's murdering of Abel, and so he's not having it's not going to have as good a luck of producing good, vibrant crops. So it's going to be more difficult. And then in verse 13, And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And so we see that Cain complains to the Lord. Instead of repenting, instead of realizing that God's justly punishing him for what he's done, Cain is like, my punishment's too much, Lord. Why are you doing this to me? I don't deserve this. And isn't that the attitude of a lot today? When things don't go their way, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this punishment. I don't deserve what you're doing to me, Lord. And so he says, you've driven me from the face of the earth, and everybody that might find me will want to kill me. And so we see that he's, I'm continually running about, to and fro in the earth. It says in verse 15, And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So the Lord gives him a little bit of a reprieve here. He says, anybody that tries to kill you, if they try vengeance on you, will be punished sevenfold. And then additionally, he puts a mark upon Cain that identifies that God said you can't kill him. And so God's not allowing Cain to be slain by somebody who wants to take vengeance for the murder of Abel. And we don't know what that mark is. There's not a whole lot of point in speculating, but we see that is what the situation that Cain's in. And so now we're going to finish out the chapter, the next through 16 through 24. We're going to look at the genealogy or the line of Cain as it progresses. And it says in verse 16, And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So here we see Cain goes out from the presence of the Lord. The Lord pushed him away. He's no longer able to have fellowship with the Lord at all whatsoever, and he dwells in this land of Nod on the east of Eden. And then we see that he knows his wife and has a son named Enoch, and he builds a city and names it Enoch also. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad beget Mehujalah, and Mehujalah beget Methuselah, and Methuselah beget Lamech. And Lamech took unto him two wives, and the name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So here we see this genealogy here. We see Cain's son Enoch, we see his grandson Irad, we see his great-grandson Mehujalah, see his great-great-grandson Methuselah, and we see his great-great-great, Lamech. So we see this trend out here. But what do we see in the way of Cain that develops within his family? Lamech takes 2 wives, which was against God's plan. God said, man's going to have a wife. He's going to cling to his wife. It's not God's plan for a man to have 2 wives. So we see that Lamech takes 2 wives here. And this is, interestingly, the first time we have any mention of any other women's names besides Eve in the Bible is these 2 wives that he took. And then this Lamech has these 3 sons and a daughter here. And so we see the first son here, he's one that's kind of a nomad, one that raises cattle. The next one is one that deals with music. So we see the development of music within society, within the family of Cain here. And then we see that Tubal-Cain, his 3rd son here, was one that worked in metals and did metal work. But next thing we see here, looking more at Lamech here, which we get a little detail about in verse 23 and 24, says, And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 70-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. So we see here, Lamech boasts about killing a couple of guys. And he says, if Cain is going to be avenged 7-fold, I'll be, with a proud, rebellious heart against God, I will be avenged 77 times over. And we just kind of see that this way of Cain just continues to develop and gets really, kind of a very rebellious and against God here. The way of Cain, a works salvation, a works thing here. And so then this brings us to, at this point it looks a little dreary. Cain, Adam and Eve's had 2 sons. The eldest ends up and kills the second one, and he's ejected. He's caused to be out of the presence of God. He's exiled from everybody else, from Adam and Eve and any other brothers and sisters he had at the time, other than his wife that he takes with him there. But we see that it looks kind of dismal. But verse 25, there's a new hope. It says, And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, she said, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, who Cain slew. And so here, again, Adam and Eve have another child. They name him Seth. And Seth actually means a substitute. And so we see here the fact that she says, the Lord has appointed me another seed instead of Abel. So he is a substitute to Abel, whom Cain slew. And it says in verse 26, And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So we see here that men begin to have a call upon God's name. And actually, if you start looking at some of the names of these people, their name actually has to do with God in their name additionally. But we see that I think also men begin to have to redevelop a relationship here. They begin to call upon the name of the Lord, begin to pray unto the Lord, talk unto the Lord here. And so we see that there is a new hope here. So in chapter 5, we're going to get a genealogy of Adam through Seth, and we're just going to kind of touch on a few high points through this. And hopefully I don't butcher these names too bad. It says, verse 1 of chapter 5, this is the book of the generations of Adam, and I'll point out the generations there that we pointed out in a previous lesson, that generations is a common theme throughout the book of Genesis. And so here is a second time it talks about the generations of someone here. And it says, In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. So here we get kind of a recounting of the fact that God created them. He created them in his likeness, created them male and female, and he said here he called them together Adam. And again, that harkens back to the fact that they are bone of, Adam and Eve are bone of the same. She's bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. He was taken out of her. They are, they may be 2 individuals, but they are one in the marriage relationship, and that they are thus called by Adam's name, Adam. It says, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. So here we see that he has his name, the son Seth, which we already saw here in the last part of chapter 4. It says, and the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So Adam lived to be the ripe old age of 930 years. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. So Seth didn't live quite as long as his father, about 18 years less there at 912 years. It says, and Enos lived 90 years and begat Cainan. And Enos lived after he begat Cainan 815 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. And Cainan lived 70 years and begat Mahalaleel, and Cainan lived after he begat Mahalaleel 840 years and begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Cainan were 910 years, and he died. And so basically we're just getting this progression down through here. And Mahalaleel lived 65 years and begat Jared. And Mahalaleel lived after he begat Jared 830 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalaleel were 895 years, and he died. So he lived, didn't quite live 900 years. So we see, lifespans are getting a little bit less. We are going to still have not reached the oldest man to live here yet. But it says, and Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. So Jared lived, at this point, is the oldest man to have ever lived at 962 years. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years, and he begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So here we learn about Enoch, a man who walked with God, a man who walked so closely with God that God took him. And Hebrews tells us a little bit, back over in Hebrews 11 again, tells us a little bit more about Enoch. In verse number 5 says, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony, that he pleased God. So he walked with God, he pleased God, and he was translated and did not see death. And of course, verse number 6 goes right along with that. But without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So we see that Enoch, due to his faith and his close walk with God, did not face death. And then a little bit more we learn about Enoch in Jude verse number 14, we find out that Enoch was a prophet, because it says, in Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, of all their land hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So we find that Enoch also was a prophet. And then we come on down here, and interesting thing about Methuselah here is his name means when he is dead it shall come. And it's interesting that he dies right before the flood that we'll be studying about in the coming weeks. But it says in verse 25, and Methuselah lived 107 years and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years. So 969 years is how long Methuselah lived. He was the oldest man to ever live. And always a little trivia question that'll get people a lot of times is to say Methuselah's the oldest man he ever lived, but he still died before his father. And, people scratch their head and say, how's that possible? And because Enoch never died. It says in verse 28, and Lamech lived lived 182 years and begat a son, and called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. You know, it's interesting that he lived 777 years. Triple sevens, God's number of perfection. It says, and Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Noah waited a long time to have kids. He was 500 years old, and we're not explicitly told this. He says he begat these 3 boys. We could almost assume that they were triplets, because it doesn't, everything that indicates that you know, they weren't, nothing ever indicates that they were born at separate times. So they're always mentioned together as being the 3 sons of Noah. And so that brings us through from Adam all the way down to Noah, and Noah is the next really big important event that we're going to be looking at, and that's the flood. And hope you got a little something out of this. I know it's kind of scattered and maybe not a whole lot said to help you, but hope you got a little something out of it, and thank you for watching.